Hey there, everybody. Welcome to TCM. I'm Ben Mankiewicz. We have devoted nights of programming to actors and actresses, of course, to directors, to writers, even to special effects creators. But rarely have we dedicated entire nights to the producers who shepherd projects from A to Z. Well, we're doing it tonight with a slate of films produced by Alan Ladd Jr. He followed his father into the film industry, but stayed behind the camera, first as an agent before conquering Hollywood as a producer. And joining me tonight to help tell Ladd's story is a close friend of his and the producer and director of a new Ladd documentary, which kicks off our programming tonight, Stanley Isaacs. Stanley, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, when we talk about Alan Ladd Jr., when we talk about any producer in Hollywood, when people who don't know much about movies ask what a producer does, there are literally 1,000 answers to that question. Regarding Alan Ladd Jr., what does it mean when we talk about Laddie as a producer?
Having the good sense to know a good story and having the courage to make movies that other people might not have seen the way he saw the possibility of them turning out. He trusted filmmakers.
Well, that's what I was going to get to, because that's what really comes across in the documentary, is that obviously he wanted to keep, it was very important that the budget stay within what the budget was set at. That's what any reasonable producer would expect and demand. But he had faith in filmmakers. He didn't seem like he thought that he should be making the artistic decisions that go into a movie. If he was going to work with a filmmaker, it's because he trusted their vision.
Absolutely. And that was the thing that comes across when we see the documentary. You'll hear how many stories where it was, well, so-and-so knew, Ron Howard knew, or George Lucas knew, or Ridley Scott knew, and he just went with what the filmmaker's instinct was right.
I don't think many people know that Alan Ladd produced Star Wars.
Well, technically, he greenlit the movie.
Okay.
He was the president of production at 20th Century Fox.
Counting his time at Fox and at the Ladd Company, what are the movies that Alan Ladd Jr. had a hand in producing?
Young Frankenstein, Star Wars, The Right Stuff, Braveheart, Chariots of Fire, Police Academy, a total departure for him.
Made a little money?
In terms of product. Once Upon a Time in America, Julia, Silver Streak,
Norma Ray.
Norma Ray.
Alien.
Yes. There's 100 and some odd movies. We could sit here all night and just rattle off the titles.
So how did you develop a friendship with Alan Ladd Jr.?
My brother-in-law, the late Ashley Boone Jr., worked with Ladd at Fox and at the Ladd Company. And so I've known Laddie since I met my wife, Cheryl, way back 37 years ago. So I've known the man that long, and Cheryl and Ashley both worked together at the Ladd Company for a number of years, too.
Your wife, Cheryl Boone Isaacs, is of some note in this industry. It's worth mentioning the job she just left.
Yes, 4 years she was president of the Motion Picture Academy.
She did a great job, and there were some tumultuous times, and I thought she spearheaded that organization very impressively. So the people who you talked to in the documentary, which we're about to see, these are guys who go to lunch together every week.
Every week. It's a tradition that started in the mid-'70s, and it still continues to this day. And there's a great story in the documentary about how that all came about and why Mel Brooks pays for lunch every Friday.
It is a great story. Just tell the people, without telling the story, who goes to that lunch.
Jay Cantor, Jay Cantor is a partner of Ladd's. They've known each other since Laddie was a kid, because Jay was Alan Ladd's father's agent, Alan Ladd, the actor.
Yes.
Mel Brooks, Michael Gruskoff, who was a partner on a bunch. He produced Young Frankenstein with Mel and a bunch of other movies, including My Favorite Year. And the other gentleman is Richard Donner, who we all know as Superman, The Omen, and a list of films, all the Lethal Weapon movies.
Stanley, thanks very much. Good stuff. Let's take a look at your movie. It's a TCM premiere from 2016. It's always about the story. Conversations with Alan Ladd Jr. I am back with Stanley Isaacs, who produced and directed the Alan Ladd Jr. documentary that we just saw. So I'm curious, Stanley, this documentary focuses on Ladd's career as a producer. There's nothing in it about, clearly deliberately, about Ladd's relationship with his father, Alan Ladd.
True. We discussed basically Ladd's career as a filmmaker and a producer. I didn't want to get into making a documentary about his life story. But it was he has said many times he grew up in in the shadow of Hollywood, and he was privileged to know a lot of great movie stars, as he talked about in the documentary. And interestingly enough, he even was candid enough to say, as a kid, he didn't really respect or appreciate some of these people, and but now as an older gentleman and having gone through what he's gone through, he's now become, like most of us, he recognized Bogart and Cagney and Bette Davis, the greats.
Yeah, it's a great moment when he says in the doc there that he didn't really have a lot of respect for Bette Davis and Cary Grant at the time, and now he gets it.
And imagine just growing up, well, you can imagine growing up in your household and people are coming in and out the front door that you're seeing up on the big screen all the time. It's quite amazing.
What I admire enormously is that as a kid growing up in the shadow of a father who was a giant for a time in the industry, that he completely carved out his own place in Hollywood.
And I think mostly, this is my supposition, it's because of his nature. He wasn't a guy to go in front of the camera. As you could see from his demeanor, he's not that outgoing a gentleman. But his creative talent was as big, if not bigger, than what his father had as an actor.
So he produced a lot of movies that were focused on women.
He was a groundbreaker in that sense, as the documentary pointed out. His staff during the 70s, he had half of his staff were women who went on to run, as Mike Ruskoff talked about, they went on to run studios.
Yeah.
Plus having someone like Ashley, who, he broke the color barrier as well. And he never thought anything of it. It was just, like he said, the right man for the job, the right woman for the job.
Tell me about the Film History Preservation Project.
That's an organization that I started. I had produced one other documentary on Albert S. Ruddy, producer of The Godfather.
Yeah.
And that got me thinking about, oh my God, there are so many wonderful people in this business that have a history that have not been told, that's not preserved for the next generation of filmmakers. So it's become kind of like my mission to go out there and interview as many of my friends and acquaintances as I can to get the stories behind the stories.
Producers aren't sexy, right?
No, they're not. But yet they are, because I describe it, anyone says, what does a producer do? I said, you push an elephant up the hill.
Right.
And that's the constant job that you have, because you don't get the accolades, you don't get the spotlight. The only time you get an accolade is when you're the producer, when you win the Best Picture.
That's it, right.
And you got the
And then everyone goes, who's that guy?
Yeah,
right,
who's that guy?
Right.
Yeah, really. So most of the time you see a movie and you pay attention to the director and the stars and the writers, you know them. And
sometimes even the cinematographer.
Yeah, but the producer? There are a few that have carved their own identity.
All right, Stanley, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Up next, Stanley and I return to introduce an Oscar-nominated film produced by Alan Ladd Jr.'s company, the Ladd Company, that Ladd claims he has refused to see. Hey everybody, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM. Up next, we continue our salute to producer Alan Ladd Jr., the son of actor Alan Ladd. Laddie, as he's known, was instrumental in getting some of the biggest movies to the big screen, including Young Frankenstein, Braveheart, Star Wars, and the movie we have coming up next, from 1983, The Right Stuff. Joining me to discuss the movie and the career of Alan Ladd Jr. is Stanley Isaacs. Stanley produced and directed a documentary about Ladd. Stanley, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So The Right Stuff is an interesting story, because as we mentioned, as we were tossing to the movie from the documentary, despite the fact that he produced it, 8 nominations, 4 Oscars, Alan Ladd Jr. claims he's never seen the final product.
That's what he says. It is quite amazing. It was... Ladd requested cuts to the film. He felt, as he said in the documentary, it should be under 3 hours.
By the way, a producer saying that a movie should be under 3 hours, it doesn't sound unreasonable.
Well, but it was a massive story. You're telling a massive story. And I was at that screening that we talk about at the Castro Theater in San Francisco.
The premiere?
The premiere, well, it was one of the first public screenings it was a test market screening. Gotcha. And halfway through the screening that night, I remember the air conditioning went out in the theater and not one soul got up to leave. They were riveted to the screen. They were watching the picture. And it was July in San Francisco, so it was a pretty nasty night. But the picture played great, but then there was a meeting afterwards talking about what cuts and what changes needed to be made. And Phil Kaufman apparently agreed to make them. Then Ladd, as he said, got sick, went to the hospital. When he came back, everything that they asked to be cut was put back in.
Prior to the existence of the Ladd Company, Alan Ladd Jr. was an executive at Fox.
Correct.
And sort of the thought was that he would stay forever. What caused him to leave and then start this company that was wildly successful on its own?
As I understand it, now again, this is my understanding, I can't vouch for the authenticity of all the facts, but the success of Star Wars was so enormous that Ladd went to management and felt that his top executives deserved some kind of a bonus for the work and the success of the movie. And when it didn't get done in a fit, as Mel Brooks said, just quite unexpectedly and uncharacteristically, Ladd felt that he had to just quit. He couldn't stay there. He left and started the new company, the Ladd Company, and he was releasing all of his films then through Warner Brothers.
I imagine leaving Fox as an executive and going to start your own company, given the enormous success that the company had, it was also turned out to be a financially wise decision for Alan Ladd Jr.
Well, they had some enormously successful movies. There's no question about it. I mean, again, like we talked earlier about Police Academy, this was a little movie that everybody was kind of like, yeah, go make it, you know, and what it's spawned 6 sequels and, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, you know, on a movie that had a shoestring budget compared to, you know, most of the other projects that, you know, compared to The Right Stuff or Once Upon a Time in America were very expensive.
Alan Ladd Jr. seems, as it comes through in your documentary, which we aired earlier tonight, there'll be an encore presentation later tonight after we have Chariots of Fire, that he was a handshake guy. Like, you could convince him in the room and he'd say, okay, we've settled on $8 million, shake his hand, and then drawing up the papers was a mere formality.
That was the way business was done with him. I mean, it was an understanding. He trusted the people that he worked with, and people trusted him.
So that gets a little bit to why he might have had a problem with Philip Kaufman, because here on The Right Stuff, it goes way over budget.
Way over budget.
Usually when there is that kind of fight between the producer and the director and that sort of runaway budget, I find, I don't have empirical evidence of this, but generally there's something wrong with the movie. In the case of The Right Stuff, in the end, the finished product still turned out great.
It's an almost perfect film. I have my considerations about knowing what they wanted to cut. But I look at it and I think it's such a great slice of Americana and American history.
All right, well, we'll talk more about that after the movie. Here it is, though, from 1983, directed and written by Philip Kaufman and starring Sam Shepard, Scott Glenn, Ed Harris, and Dennis Quaid. The Right Stuff. I'm back with Stanley Isaacs, here to discuss The Right Stuff and the career of his friend, producer Alan Ladd Jr. So we talked a little about Ladd's conflict with the writer and director Philip Kaufman, who he doesn't even name, just refers to as the director. So the story, to remind people, Kaufman kept about 15 minutes in the movie. Ladd had wanted it brought in under 3 hours. Right. It's about 3:15. Do you know, has Ladd told you what he wanted cut, more or less?
The best of my recollection, a lot of it involved the end of the movie and wanting to end on a much more dramatic note with the Chuck Yeager story with the crash of the plane and some of that stuff in Houston with the fan dance, and kind of slowed the whole momentum of the movie, and it didn't build to that great crescendo. You know? What's
amazing is in a 3 hour and 15-minute movie about the Mercury 7 is that, of course, it just ends. At some point, you have to end the story because the story continues. And, and you know, I mean, obviously, you know, a movie with a terrific performance by Fred Ward as Gus Grissom in the movie, but obviously there's a lot more to Gus Grissom's story.
Well, you know, it's funny. You mentioned Fred Ward. When we first saw the movie, with the great ensemble cast, and most of these guys were relatively brand new to the audiences, my wife and I both felt Fred Ward was going to have a major career.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, in that Bogart-esque kind of character, hangdog look, and it just, for whatever reason, it didn't quite connect. You know, whereas Scott Glenn and Ed Harris and Dennis Quaid.
And Sam Shepard to some extent, too.
Yeah, right. To more than some extent.
Well, I mean, but most of it as a writer. But also
I have my feeling that Fred Ward had he did that Remo Williams movie. It worked as a franchise. His career might have gone off in a different direction, yeah.
Yeah, he's a terrific actor. Fred Ward, Robert Forster, I always put them together.
Two of my favorites.
Two of my favorites, that's right. So, is Alan Ladd Jr., is he retired? Does he?
No, he's still active. I mean, I know he's got a couple of projects. If you check out on the IMDb page, I think there's 1 or 2 projects that he's still attached to, but not nowhere near as active as he was. and he still sees his friends every week for lunch, and I'm sure they're always talking new projects.
You've been to that lunch, yeah?
I have.
I stumbled into one. It was the greatest 90 minutes not the greatest 90 minutes of my life, but a pretty great 90 minutes.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, just when you stop and think about the history that these men have and the fact that they're friends for so many years in a business that's pretty disposable.
Yeah.
You know, these guys sit there and they enjoy each other's company and they share so many, they've been a part of each other's lives for, again, we're talking the mid-'70s and earlier with Jay.
Jay Cantor, who was an agent and then a producer, Alan Ladd, agent and a producer, Mel Brooks, Richard Donner, the director, Michael Gruskoff, a producer, and I think it's Jay Cantor's line in your documentary that they've been going to lunch so long, they used to talk about girls.
My favorite line. I love that.
Now
we used to talk about girls, now we think about girls, but we talk about doctors.
That's right.
Which
Stanley,
is great.
Great stuff. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Up next, Stanley and I return to introduce another Alan Ladd Jr. production, the Best Picture Oscar winner for 1981. Hey there, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM. Producer Alan Ladd Jr. began his career in the film industry in 1963 as an agent. From there, he produced a few films in the UK before becoming the head of creative affairs at 20th Century Fox. Under Ladd's guidance, the studio released Young Frankenstein, Alien, and Star Wars. In 1979, he formed his own production company, the Ladd Company, and continued to produce hit after hit, including the film we have coming up next, the Best Picture Oscar winner for 1981, Chariots of Fire. And joining me to discuss the film and the career of Alan Ladd Jr. is Stanley Isaacs, the director and producer of a new documentary we presented earlier tonight about the career of Alan Ladd Jr. Stanley, welcome back.
Thank you for having me again.
So this was a Best Picture Oscar winner. Was this the first Best Picture Oscar winner for the Ladd Company?
Yes, it was. It was Ladd, again, in typical Alan Ladd Jr. fashion, saw the movie. It was produced by David Putnam in England, and the Ladd Company picked up the picture for domestic distribution through their deal at Warner Brothers.
And a big upset that year, an incredibly competitive year, 1981.
Reds, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Chariots of Fire on Golden Pond and Atlantic City.
Atlantic City, yeah.
And Chariots of Fire won.
What kind of a producer is Alan Ladd Jr.? Because, again, we've seen it right here. And on one level, he's a producer because he sees a movie that has been produced in the UK and thinks, I got to distribute this movie in the United States. There's money to be made here. People need to see this movie. Then there's finding a project and taking it from every step of the way, from A to Z, to then going out, hiring a director, working with the director on casting, and then marketing and getting the movie distributed with a company, which was Warner Brothers for the Ladd Company.
Well, again, it comes back to, I think he had amazing taste, and he was very courageous in trusting the filmmaker's vision.
So we've talked about it a little bit tonight before your documentary, and we also aired The Right Stuff. Now we have Chariots of Fire coming, but this lunch that they have on Fridays in Beverly Hills, Mel Brooks, Richard Donner, Michael Gruskoff, Jay Cantor, and Alan Ladd Jr. Have you attended this lunch?
In order to get the picture that's included in the documentary, because I needed some pictorial evidence of this.
Right, because you talk about the lunch, you got to see them at the lunch.
I called Mel I needed permission to go, and he said, okay, as long as you know you're not staying for lunch. And I thought that was perfect. It was great. I didn't expect anything other than, please let me come and let me get this picture. And Mel is very gracious and generous. I mean, he gave me so much time and energy, you know, in the interview, and you could tell. I have more than what's in the documentary is still in the computer waiting to be put into something else, because the stories are just great.
I got coffee out of him. Did you get coffee?
No, I was actually having lunch with someone else at the same restaurant.
All right, so I'm just saying, I got coffee.
Well, you're one up on me, man. That's great.
Stanley, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Here's the movie, directed by Hugh Hudson from 1981, a Best Picture Oscar winner, Chariots of Fire. I'm back with documentary filmmaker Stanley Isaacs to discuss the career of his friend, producer Alan Ladd Jr., and Chariots of Fire. So, Stanley, you produced the Ladd documentary as part of this film history preservation project. What is that, and what are you working on now? I'm in post-production editing right now on a documentary on producer Mace Neufeld,
who is, again, for most people, the name wouldn't matter to them.
Because it's a producer.
But
right.
he produced and it overlaps the Ladd documentary because he was the executive producer of The Omen.
Producers like Alan Ladd, they are quite literally behind the scenes. I mean, directors are behind the scenes, but film fans know directors.
Yeah.
Film fans don't always know producers, and sometimes producers get a bad name because, you know, you mentioned that earlier in our conversations this evening that producers hear the word no more than anything. Yeah. I think for many people, they imagine that producers are the people saying no.
Well, sometimes it overlaps because, again, the studio could be the producer. They're the production entity that's making the movie, and as a writer, as a director, you're bringing your projects to the studios. So sometimes they are the ones saying no, but as an independent producer, unless you have a deal at a studio, you're going out to sell your product to somebody. You need a buyer. You create a product, you find a book, a story, whatever, and develop a screenplay and get a cast together and bring an actor get your director into the project. Then you got to go shop it. And so you're hearing lots of no's, but it is what it is, and it's a lot of fun, and it still is a lot of fun, and there's magic to it. You know, when something comes together after all that hard work, there's this magical feeling that's almost impossible to describe. And when you're taking that even further, when you get nominated for Best Picture, and when you win Best Picture, the odds are so against you because there's so many pictures being made, and making a film is so many moving parts. You know, there's so many people from wardrobe, music, makeup, hair, camera, sound.
So many things that can go wrong.
Yeah, or go right. And the thing that's so incredible, if you could replicate it, everyone would make a great picture.
Well, that's why we make sequels.
Yes, well,
we try very hard to replicate.
Yeah, we try to replicate,
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes they work even better than the original.
Stanley, this was great stuff. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Stanley and I are done for the night. In the meantime, though, we're bringing you an encore presentation of the documentary Stanley produced and directed about Alan Ladd Jr.'s career. It's always about the story. Conversations with Alan Ladd Jr. Stay with us.